I think one of the challenges with narcissists is they don't have identity permanence. Like when you listen to like antisocial or psychopath or whatever, um, some of those people, they express that they don't have anxiety for the future, that emotions are very fleeting. See, I think, what happens with narcissists and other personality disorders is they get emotional development arrested almost in infancy. There's a period of time where all human beings don't have any identity. As a baby, the baby only experiences itself in the reflection of the mother. And, they exude behaviors as to manipulate the mother. As a survival strategy, they cry when they have needs, and they have a reward system of expressing what appears to be joy or happiness as a result of getting needs met. But what happens when a baby is birthed to a narcissist or any kind of person that lacks empathy? Well, they don't get attended to. They're inconvenient. And it requires like a hypervigilance on the part of the child. They have to be more distraught. What happens if they're traumatized? What happens if they're abused? What happens if you hurt a child before they have an opportunity to develop object permanence or start the process of developing an independent personality, psychological structures that are intended to engage a world outside of themselves? Well, I think you have human beings that can develop consciously where, other people outside of themselves exist, but emotionally the structures are suspended in their development. And so they can have object permanence with emotional impermanence, and they become unable to manage the maintenance of an identity independent of engagement with other people, like a baby. So emotionally, it's like peekaboo, where, they can become, unstable and distraught with respect to their identity. It explains narcissistic supply in some ways that, without the means to self-sustain an identity, they become, hypervigilant in the pursuit of existing. So when you think about a baby, a baby has not formulated a being yet. And the other challenge is that a lot of the normal things that we call trauma are really just originating moments at the very genesis of identity. But people with these personality disorders likely bypass that developmental period by already being suspended in childlike narcissism, where they only exist for their needs to be met. The baby only exists for its needs to be met. And that's why, narcissists are extremely emotionally immature, because they only exist for their needs to be met, and their relationship to the outside world is all about their needs being met. And their emotional framework sets the tone in terms of how they relate. So the baby, its own emotional state, dictates its externalization in relationship to the mother. In a sense, crying and dissatisfaction is a punishment. It's not a guilt punishment or whatever, but it stimulates a negative feeling. A baby cries in a hospital, all these mothers are ejecting milk. That the connection between the mother and the baby is very profound and instrumental in the healthy emotional development. But what happens if you have a covert or malignant mother? God forbid they're even physically abusive or torturing. So, these originating moments of trauma seem to completely disrupt the emotional development. And instead of having an internal state where you have the presence of sadness, happiness, joy, all the things that compose an intact individual, they just have all the formlessness of terror, pain, things that we can put words to later. However, within the core of these individuals, these emotional experiences are formless in terms of not having language that can describe them. Retroactively, We can try to understand emotionally what a narcissist goes through. However, you have to understand that guilt, remorse, happiness, sadness, like these emotions do not translate. That a narcissist who experiences narcissistic injury can explain the origin of the injury and then put a word to it, like I'm jealous. However, in what I experience is that a narcissistic injury is universal, meaning like when they have an injury, all it really does is it's a deconstruction of the false reality, and then it returns them into an internal state. And then they start to get present to the feelings and emotions that are within this, expanse of suffering. And, they spend their entire lifetime, with identity impermanence, where they have to constantly seek the engagement of other people emotionally. You see, when you talk about emotional regulation, it's like if they don't have the capacity to generate emotion independently, why do you think they need your motivation? Why do you think a covert needs you to shame them with guilt in order to get them to motivate and start to externalize different behaviors? It's that they don't have the same emotional framework or freedom to generate, on their own experiential level. That they're, extracting emotions because they did develop pathways that have a reactionary relationship to the perception of reality. That what you're dealing with the narcissist is you have two different realities that are overlapping, yours and theirs, where you exist to meet their needs, like a mother, and they have entitlement. The baby has entitlement. That like it's your job as a mother. And so in a sense, you're a surrogate for the mother or parent of a person that was traumatized to such an extent that they never had the opportunity to develop like other people, and instead have a makeshift persona that requires ongoing maintenance on their part, that they are always having to fight off reality. They have to retroactively recreate the past to avoid injury. They cannot acknowledge things that they do that are inconsistent with that identity that they generate, because that would cause a fracturing of the very reality that they live within, the reality that creates a reflectant being. That in the human experience, what seems to me to be universal is that the person you're being in the moment is a direct correlation to the reality that you live within in the moment. That if you're being nice out of necessity. But the sense of necessity is generated based on an interpreted view of reality, and that interpreted view of reality is given by the being itself. And so you think you need to be good enough. You think you need to be nice. You think that you need to figure it out. You think you need to analyze. You think you need to be funny. So your personality is a developmental psychological structure that generates an external world to relate to. And that's why you carry your past, and it's just a different mechanism. And that very mechanism becomes the basis of narcissistic abuse and control, because they lack that. But in observing you with that, they can trigger you, but they trigger you purposefully and inadvertently, because what they're attempting to do is transform you by killing off all the things about you that's inconsistent with what they can understand within their universe, within their world. People don't exist as complete beings because they don't have the emotional framework to interpret complete beings. It's like emotional colorblindness. And since they don't have a normal internal emotional environment, they cannot generate in their imagination an accurate version of reality as it pertains to the emotional states, motivations, and intentions of other people. And therefore, that's why they're paranoid. Therefore, that's why they're competitive. Therefore, that's why everything other people do is interpreted as a slight, interpreted as a disadvantage, interpreted as something to compete against. And they need control in order to try to manage the maintenance of their existence. And that's what I see. I think that there's something about impermanence of identity from emotionally being arrested in development.